You are tuned into the Power Chord Hour right here on 107.9 WRFA, or if you're watching us on YouTube or listening to the Power Chord Hour podcast, many ways to check this out. Thank you very much for checking it out. I'm excited today. We're talking to returning guest Justin Perkins. We had him on a few years ago here for the Tim Let It Bleed reissue. And today we're talking about his remastering work on the upcoming Let It Be Deluxe Edition that is coming out here on Rhino Records November 21st. Pre-orders are available now. And yeah, if you're listening as this comes out, it's not out yet. Maybe if you're listening a few weeks later, that bad boy is out. Either way, I'm very excited for it, and I'm excited to talk to Justin all about it. So, Justin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on and, doing such a great show. I enjoy all your, I subscribe to your podcast, so it's nice when they pop up on the feed. We have similar tastes, I think.
Oh, no, we definitely do. And I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'm always catching up with what you're doing. I mean, this is a loaded question is the wrong word, but I know you're very busy this year in mystery, with not just the replacements remastering, but just mystery room mastering in general. Like, how has this year been? I'm talking to you here a few days away from November. It seems like quite a crazy year in mastering. Very busy for you from the outside looking in.
Yeah, it is. I mean, with mastering in general, it's you do a lot of projects because I probably said this last time, but a new album I can master in a day. So, I mean, you think about even if you just work 5 days a week, that's a lot of projects. A lot of people are doing singles now, which kind of annoys me, but I do a lot of singles because bands want to release just a single every few weeks, which is fine. The reason it annoys me is because then eventually that needs to be a record, and then you got to explain to them. I know I mastered 5 songs for you individually, but that doesn't mean they're going to all be perfect. It's not ready for an album yet. I don't have to start over, but something has to be done to make this a cohesive EP or album. So yeah, basically I do a lot of projects because of the nature of mastering, whereas like people producing and mixing, they spend longer periods of time on fewer projects. So mastering engineers look busy just because of the nature of the work. It's a little bit like photo retouching. You're not out there producing photo shoots. The photo retoucher is just getting bombarded with or color correction. It's the last step, so it's a quicker process.
How about like the balance? Because I know you do both, like in terms of mastering new music and then doing remasters. I mean, is there any kind of balance off the top of your head where you'd say I do about this much remastering work, I do this much like mastering new stuff? Is there any kind of balance, or does that just kind of go almost month to month, year to year?
Yeah, it fluctuates. I mean, I do a little bit of stuff for Rhino. That's starting to pick up again, actually. And then I do a lot of stuff for Universal Music Group and Interscope. It's all under the same umbrella. And, it comes in waves a little bit. It seems like they're always in a rush. They're like, hey, can you have this ready in like 3 days? And then I got to put the brakes on whatever I was doing and squeeze it in. And it's fine because it's good work. It's good for the resume. It tends to be the stuff I share a little more, I guess, because it's a little higher profile than some of the independent artists. I try to share independent releases too, because that's my bread and butter and how I got my start in music being independent bands, so I totally get it. But the reissue stuff might get a little more attention because it's Elliott Smith and Carly Rae Jepsen and the Sundays and the Cranberries and the Replacement. Just bigger stuff, so people remember it more. But I'd say like probably fluctuates from 60 to 70% new music and then 30 to 40% reissues depending on the month and things like that. I have a feeling that it's going to be busy the rest of the year because especially like Universal, it's a corporate world, so everyone probably wants to get their projects done before the holiday break, end of the year and stuff like that. So it could get busy for sure with that. But yeah, so I like to do both. Remastering is interesting because there's already a precedent. There's a previous reissue that people usually know and love. In some cases they don't love it as much, and your job is to make them love it as much as they should have the first time. But it's also a lot of like bonus tracks, live material. People on some of the audio forums, I think they assume you always, when you're remastering, you're always gifted this like immaculate pure file that is totally ready for mastering. But sometimes the sources don't exist anymore. Sometimes tapes deteriorate, they get lost. Especially stuff in the 90s and 2000s. I've done plenty of remastering for Universal projects where, like, for some reason in the vault, like, one of the songs we don't have unmastered mix for. Maybe like they hired a level mixer for the single, and that wasn't included in the reels that the main producer mixed, and they don't. And sometimes you have to work from the CD master, which is unfortunate, but I've done it for the whole project or just certain songs. This is. I'm just speculating, but I was doing some kind of like early 2000s indie punk power pop thing. I had great sources for all the songs, but there was one transitional thing between two songs that wasn't included in the record label vaults. And I'm just assuming that maybe like one of the band members made this little interlude at their home studio, because that's when it was really easy to have a home studio, like a little laptop and an interface. I'm guessing one of the band members made this little interlude and they just took it to the mastering session and snuck it in between the two songs, and it never made it into the record label's vault of, archives. So I've had to steal little interludes from like the CD master and, little tricks just to get it done. So I think sometimes people think you're always just like working from the perfect source, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes it's an old tape transfer with dropouts. Sometimes the tapes are just gone. I mean, I even did one project for Universal where it was like 4 records for an obscure 70s country artist, and one of the 4 records, the tapes just didn't exist. So they sent me a sealed vinyl copy that someone found, and I remastered from that. I did a lot of removing of clicks and pops from the vinyl, and that's just how it goes sometimes. It's not always a perfect scenario where you're remastering from such a pure source that, it's a piece of cake. Sometimes it's a real challenge.
I think that stuff's so interesting because, I've had on a decent amount of like producers and engineers, but like, and I'm sure I've talked to you last time we were on here, but like, I don't have many people who do mastering. So it's so interesting to kind of hear about that aspect of things. I think it's a part people don't think about. I think, or at least they can't explain as well. Like, I feel like producing and engineering is a little easier to define in some ways, but with like mastering, I don't know that people always know what mastering really is. So I think it's interesting to like get into it with you, like the nuts and bolts of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, it really became apparent with, the whole Tim Let It Bleed thing, because for one, they accidentally left the mastering credit off of the physical box, which Oof. I'm over that. But, like, people don't really know the difference between remixing and remastering. There's so many, even some articles like, the Ed Stasium remaster of Tim, and it's like, no, he remixed it. And then I mastered his new mixes, but then I also remastered the original album, and you can only do so much in mastering. And I don't expect people to know the difference, but basically I'll try to give a short answer. Remixing or mixing is when you have individual control over usually each instrument. I mean, in the 60s they had to like record the band live and then overdub the vocals, so you couldn't in the 60s a lot of 60s stuff you can't go in and turn up the bass guitar because it's all recorded to 1 or 2 tracks. They only had 4 tracks to work with, or maybe 8. In the 70s and 80s, we got 24 tracks. So basically, like, every drum mic had its own track, every guitar part had its own track, every keyboard part, every vocal. So you could really control the level of each, instrument, each vocal, each vocal, backing vocal, lead vocal. You could control the effects on each vocal and keyboard. Everything was really separated. So you can really do some transformative work, which is why Ed was able to, remix Tim so drastically, with such a, crazy, a good result, but such a stark difference. Whereas, remastering, you're working from a stereo reel of tape or a stereo file. So I can't really go in and, make the snare drum sound different, or I can't go in and turn up the vocals or turn down the tambourine, or, remove the reverb from the snare. Everything's baked in. It's like all I can do is kind of all I can do is what you can do on your car stereo. I can turn up the treble, the bass, the volume. I'm dumbing it down a little bit, but that's basically what I can work with is like just the whole mix. You know, if I want to increase the low end, it might make the bass guitar have a little more beef, but it could make the kick drum too boomy. Or if the kick drum is really thin and wimpy, if I boost up some of the low frequencies to make the kick, you know, a little fatter, the bass guitar might be way too boomy if it was mixed out of balance like that. Or, you know, if I want to make something a little brighter, it's going to affect everything. You know, the snare drum might become too bright, but the guitars are just right. So anyways, you can't do as much in remastering. And I think people really expect a lot out of mastering and remastering sometimes. And it's just not, you know, it's a way more subtle process. And if you think about the history of mastering, I mean, in the 50s and 60s, nobody there. I'm not going to say there wasn't mastering, but there was really no one knew the names of any mastering engineers, because the only reason you would know their name is if they screwed up, because their job was to take this reel of tape that the producer and band and artist prepared carefully, take this reel of analog tape and cut it to a lacquer disc for vinyl and have it sound as close as possible to the tape. You know, your job was to not change the sound. Like, get this reel of tape on the lacquer for vinyl and don't screw it up and don't make it sound different, because this is what we want. And then as you get into the 70s and early 80s, mastering became more of a little bit more of someone putting their stamp and enhancement. And, you know, there was a guy named Doug Sachs that kind of pioneered mastering as we know it now, or he was sort of like the first independent mastering engineer. Up until then, the mastering engineers just worked for the pressing plants, you know, cutting the lacquers, and so they could make the vinyl. But then also what you had in the 80s was, you know, up until the early 80s, mastering was strictly for the vinyl disc. So that's all you did. Now in the early 80s, then we started to have CDs coming on the scene. And then, you know, the first few years of CDs were not pretty, because they were just they didn't know what to do. You know, there was nobody really knew what to do yet. They were still feeling it out. And the early digital technology was very brittle and harsh sounding. So, you know, the first era of CDs, maybe I remember this because I was born in 81, but I mean, some of the first CD issues of albums were really quiet compared to CDs you get now, because they didn't have the technology to blow up the waveform with a digital limiter. So all they could do was take, presumably what they were going to prepare for vinyl anyways, they would just record that to digital as loud as they could without it peaking. But, you know, that's why some old CDs are so quiet. And then in the 90s, the technology existed to just make CDs louder and louder. It got ridiculous. It's still kind of ridiculous, but I guess I'm getting off topic somehow. But
no, I love this stuff.
In the 80s, you know, in the 80s and the late 80s and 90s, then it became like the thing that people prepared at the mixing studio was not exactly ready for production. It was expected that more things were going to happen in mastering. You know, not like reinventing the wheel, but, you know, more appropriately optimizing it for each format. So, you know, sometimes I laugh at these vinyl reissues that say, you know, cut from the analog master tapes. In theory, that sounds good. If it was a jazz record from the 50s where the tape was like the master and they dialed it into perfection, and as long as the tape survived and was stored correctly, that can sound amazing. But as you get into the late 70s, 80s, you know, and 90s, the analog tapes were sort of an intermediate step. It was like a place to store the final mixes, but not necessarily something that's ready for production, because then a CD master has to be made, a cassette master, vinyl. So it gets a little trickier. So there's some stuff from the 80s and 90s where cut from the analog tapes doesn't necessarily make it better, because it might not be intended for that purpose. You know, there could, you know, whoever did the actual mastering may have done a little more than a person would have done in the 50s or 60s. So it kind of depends on the era of the music, whether cut from the analog tapes is necessarily for the best. And, you know, vinyl can still sound great even if there's digital processing involved. Where vinyl can sound bad is if somebody takes a CD master that's super loud and crushed with the limiter, and the waveform just looks like a blob,
Yeah.
that's probably going to sound bad on vinyl, not because it's digital, but because the waveform is just a big square wave. But I mean, if you do a nice high resolution, and that's what I do, is if you make a nice high resolution digital master to cut lacquers from for vinyl, it can sound really good, and it doesn't defeat the purpose of listening to vinyl. Some people seek out vinyl because if it's done well, it's cut from a more dynamic source than the brick-walled digital master usually is. I'm generalizing, but there's some people that there's a whole website called, I don't know the actual address, but there's a dynamic range database that
Oh, really?
audio nerds measure the dynamic range and loudness of CDs, streaming masters, and I think even vinyl discs still. And not always, but sometimes the vinyl is more dynamic, and it's not because it's on vinyl, it's because whoever prepared the cutting master eased up on the limiting and let it breathe a little more, and that translates better to vinyl. Now we're getting into the weeds, but basically mastering sort of got a little more convoluted into the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and today, because there's so many more formats. Before, up until the early 80s, the formats were just vinyl, so like everybody knew what to do, and your job was to just get that tape on the lacquer disc with doing as little as possible. I mean, because vinyl and lacquer has physical limitations that tape and digital do not. So just because something can be on analog tape or a digital file doesn't mean it can be on vinyl without some adjustments, compromises, and things like that.
Yeah, that stuff is. I love that stuff. It's very interesting because it is. I would never say I'm like a pro at, like, I don't know how well I can explain mastering. So hearing somebody who does it a lot, I think, is like very helpful.
The basic version is like photo retouching. Like I said, I'm not taking the photo or deciding what's in the photo. I'm just taking a pretty nice photo and doing some detail work to clean it up and make it sharper where it can be sharper. Maybe frame it a little differently, so cropping. So there's a weird, it's just really like, is meant to be, my goal is to do as little as possible to make it sound as good as possible. And, I don't want to be heavy handed. And, like I talked about, early CDs were kind of quiet, and then a lot of remasters kind of get a bad rap because for whatever reason, whether it's laziness, miscommunication, expectations that are not true, but a lot of remasters of classic records, they really got smashed with digital loudness and limiting. So some remasters are worse. There's a thread on one of the audio forums about which remasters are actually better than the original, because it doesn't, and better is subjective, but in general remastering kind of gets a bad rap because people just make it insanely loud and kind of ruin the dynamics of older, because music up through the 80s, music was produced without any digital limiting, so to add a bunch of limiting and reduce sounds wrong, can sound wrong for certain types of music. The 2009 Beatles remasters were very tastefully done. That's kind of a benchmark where we're taking older music that was done before digital limiting and bringing it up to a level that's it was a nice balance of making it loud and enhanced, but also respecting it to where it didn't sound unlistenable. And yeah, so I guess I'm getting off track again, but
Oh, no.
remastering is such a touchy thing as far as like how far should you take it. It depends on the original era, genre, intent and stuff like that.
I was going to ask too, with again, going back to that mastering something new and then remastering, say like remastering Let It Be, do you use any different like equipment or software? Is that all the same? I mean, when it comes to remastering versus mastering something new, is any of that side of things different, or no, you're using the same equipment, same software, nothing really changes there?
Yeah, basically the same. I mean, there's some, I have some analog gear behind me. There's some records that already have too much analog character going on, so in those cases I stay all digital because it's got plenty of analog character and saturation, and it's been it's almost too analog in some ways. But there are projects like for Let It Be, I did do some analog processing on that album, but on the main album, on the live show that comes with it, I didn't, because that's a audience cassette recording, and
Nice.
we don't need to get any further away. It's already like we can get to that later, but it's not like a pristine studio recording, so I stayed all digital with that, but basically using the same tools. With remastering, you also open the can of worms for restoration. Sometimes there could be tape hiss, there could be little tape dropouts. I don't know. You probably know it if you heard it, but sometimes there's like little like split second dropouts in one or both channels, and I can't fix huge dropouts, but if they're brief, similar to Photoshop, I can see it on the screen, and I can highlight where the hole is, where the dropout is, and have it fill in with similar surrounding information, so that instead of a quick little like dropout, it fills in and your brain doesn't perceive it as a dropout. If it's more than a third of a second, when I fill in that hole, it just sounds like a random noise is there. But if it's brief enough, you can, sometimes I'm fixing dropouts, ticks and pops. Back then, the resolution of monitoring the speakers wasn't as good, so ticks and pops slip by. Tape hiss that's a subjective thing, because you don't want to do too much noise reduction so that it sounds like they're in a vacuum, but sometimes tapes have too much hiss, which again, when you raise the average loudness in remastering, not too far, but sometimes you go up and the noise floor can come up a little bit, and you got to find the right balance of like how much noise reduction is enough or too much, because you don't want to sound underwater or in a vacuum. So sometimes we're using restoration tools. The main one I use is Isotope RX. It's like it's a different waveform view. It kind of looks like an X-ray, or I call it a spectrogram. And you can see little ticks and pops and just little things like that might have slipped, especially stuff that was done without any computers, like.
Oh yeah, good point.
Where people weren't looking at screens, they were just listening, and if they had small speakers, but basically the same tools, but certain records, a little more restoration. Sibilance can be a thing with vinyl. So instead of using a de-esser, I would use RX to just kind of circle or highlight the S and dim it down a little bit. Because if you use a de-esser, is like a high frequency controller. When the high frequencies are too strong, it's like a compressor for high frequencies. But if you try to use that as a de-esser, sometimes it can reduce like acoustic guitar or tambourine or stuff it shouldn't. So basically I listen through in real time, and if there's a loud S, I just circle it like you would in Photoshop, and I can reduce it by a certain amount. And that happens in real math. That I do that on plenty of new releases too, but
more on remastering.
Yeah, I mean, back then, now if you buy Pro Tools or Logic, you can put a de-esser, you can put 10 de-essers on every channel, which is ridiculous. But back then, especially like an album like Let It Be, it was more primitive studio. Like they probably, I don't even know if they had a de-esser. They probably had like one good reverb, one or two good compressors. They had much less tools to work with. So
we're going to get, now we're going to get into more of remastering Let It Be. But before we get into it, I want to ask you, because last time I had you on, we were doing Tim Let It Bleed edition. And I mean, that seems like of all the reissues, that one maybe got like the most attention. That thing seems like it is done like really well. I loved it, but I mean, also the Replacement's my favorite band. I don't know, like, was there a point where you noticed like the traction that was picking up on that Tim reissue, or like people it just seemed to get a lot of attention and press, maybe more than the other ones? Like, did you notice that at all? Or, I don't know if I feel like I noticed that, but you would notice it more than me being a part of it.
Oh yeah, I definitely noticed it. It definitely was the most, talked about reissue for sure. it's the replacements. This reissue campaign was a little weird because it started with Live at Maxwell's, which came out of nowhere, Dead Man's Pop, but then we went down to Sorry Ma, which is their first record, Pleased to Meet Me, and then Sorry. So it kind of started high and then went down to like Sorry Ma, which is a great record, but it's not going to get the attention that a Tim reissue is going to get. So we're kind of doing this now. Now there's a lot of ups and downs with it, and I didn't expect Sorry Ma to win a Grammy for best reissue or anything like that, but
it deserves it though. But
for a band, considering the nature of that release, I mean, and we did it was like 100 songs if you count all the live tracks. I mean, that was a fun one to work on. But yeah, Tim definitely got a lot of press. I was really surprised by that, and it was a big undertaking. I mean, I worked with Bob Mayer. I didn't do obviously Ed did the remixing, but he shared some of the remixes in progress with me to get my opinion on certain things, because I think I was able to help him convey mixed notes back to Ed, a little bit with a combination of technical notes and just personal feeling notes. So anyways, that was a big, and I don't do that very often. Usually I'm just getting the files and working on it, but I got a little glimpse of what it's like to produce a reissue like that, because I was asked for a couple, not just general, like, hey, does this seem good, or are you hearing anything? And so that was fun to get a little glimpse. But yeah, it was a big undertaking, and we all had to take a little break after that one.
I was going to ask about the break. I know there's been, in release time, obviously there's been a break, but I was wondering that behind the scenes in terms of if like the second Let It Bleed came out, Rhino was already like, hey, time for the next one, or if there was behind the scenes a little break in between the Tim and Let It Be reissues.
Yeah, I think there was a planned break, and then there was a couple sort of business things that had to get sorted out between the band and Rhino. And then, yeah, there was a couple. I mean, I did a lot of the work back in August of last year, so over a year ago now.
Oh, wow.
Is when I really started doing the heavy lifting on that. And then, and now there's another delay, something with the packaging. It was supposed to be out. I think it was already supposed to be out like last week, and now it's coming out just before Thanksgiving. And so yeah, this one just had a series of unexpected little setbacks, delays and stuff like that. But yeah, going back to Tim, I was surprised that they did because it sold out. The box sold out, and
oh, that's right.
It's a big. Due to the nature of the packaging, I'm guessing it would have been hard to just make a few more. So then they did the 2 LP record store day one, which I think people appreciated because, people are finicky about the formats. Some people don't like the one vinyl and 3 CDs or whatever. And so this, for Let It Be, I believe it's all CDs or all vinyl, like one or the other.
Oh, really?
You get to pick. They changed up the formatting of it. I think the band wanted to do that too, so now I think you can buy it. That way you can get all the bonus tracks on vinyl, because, with Let It Bleed and all the other ones, like the bonus tracks are just on CD or streaming. They're not on vinyl.
Didn't think about that, actually.
And then they would typically do like the live show as a record store day thing. With Pleased to Meet Me, the record store day thing was most of the outtakes, because there was no live show with that particular box set, but for the most part, yeah. So now it's all CD or all vinyl. And yeah, I started working on it back in August, and it kind of stemmed from earlier. So January, it must have been January 23, 24. I think January 24, I was in LA. And for those listening, I don't live in LA, I live in Wisconsin. So I was visiting LA, and I had lunch with Peter Jesperson. And he's like, I just got these tapes from the Let It Be session, and when I load in like a file to iTunes, I hear like just the bass drum or just the snare drum. And he's pretty good with computers, but I'm like, oh, that means you got the multi-track reel for Let It Be, so it could be remixed. Because every every wave file was just like I talked about earlier, just the bass drum, just the snare
Just the
drum.
isolated track.
Yeah. So after a lot, he's like, "Could you help me out?" Because he was in the early stages of considering a Let It Be box set, and he wanted to see what the outtakes were, and, just what they had, because he produced the original session. So I went to his house after lunch, which is cool because I'm sure there's pictures online, but his office is like wall to wall books and records, and it's almost like a museum in itself. Like at one point we were sitting there and he just reaches under the couch and pulls out the stamper for the stink, the replacement stink.
Nice.
He still had the ink stamper just under the couch in a box or something.
Oh,
But
just this thing.
so I helped him, he has a Mac, so he had GarageBand on there. So I said, let's load in all these reels and you can like at least listen to what's there and decide if any outtakes are good and stuff like that. So that was sort of the beginning of it. And as far as I know, I don't know what conversations were had leading up to that point, but in January 24, I helped Peter sort of get these files in GarageBand so he could hear what was there. And I don't really do any mixing anymore, but I casually mention like, if any of these bonus tracks need to be mixed, I'll do it. I really don't like mixing. Basically, Tommy's like Tommy Stinson is like the one person that can talk me into mixing, because we talked about it enough last time, but I wasn't mixing anymore, but I ended up doing the Bash and Pop Anything Could Happen album. And then the Cowboys and the Campfire album from a couple years ago, I mixed that. I mean, we were going into like another COVID winter where there wasn't much going on, and he was just getting ready to go into treatment for, he's sober now. And I just really wanted to get him a record that, something to look forward to. Like, let's get this record mixed while you're getting healthy. And then when you get out, this record will be out, you go on tour, all that stuff. And I had my friend Ian Alvera, he sort of prepped the sessions for me because I really don't like mixing anymore. And when files come in from, Tommy uses Logic Pro and I use Pro Tools, so it's a big mess to convert it. So my friend Ian, like, he got the sessions sort of prepared and organized, color coded how I like it, so that when I open it, I'm just mixing. And then, so when Let It Be came out, I'm like, I don't like mixing, but if I have Ian, so Ian really helped me get the bonus tracks, those mixes started. He went through and organized it all and got a good mix going. Especially, some of the bonus tracks on this Let It Be Deluxe, they are the album take, but alternate vocals. So for those, we wanted to we wanted the mixes to be similar to the album mix, like, in terms of guitar panning. So like if Bob's solo is over here on the right on the album, we don't want the remix to be totally opposite. So Ian was a big help in getting those mixes up and running. I mean, I couldn't have done it from scratch, because I just don't have the kind of time, but he got the mixes like 60, 70, 80% there. And then when I opened the session, I was like, okay, now I just have to do the fun stuff really and take it that last little bit. So yeah, we remixed, I don't know, 7 or 8 songs. I think most of them got used. Some were outtakes that had never been released officially, and there might even be one that never even got bootlegged. I could be wrong about that. But so it's fun to dive into that. But also, kind of like what I said earlier, Let It Be was mixed at a fairly primitive, I wouldn't say it was a low budget studio, but it wasn't like Paisley Park or a huge studio. I think it was in a house, Blackberry Way. But they had a good engineer, but my point was, they didn't spend like a whole day mixing each song. They probably mixed the whole record in a day or two. So I'm like, I didn't want to when I did those mixes, I didn't want to make them like too enhanced and improved. I didn't want to do like Ed Stasium, because it didn't need, like what Ed did with Tim. That was the whole purpose, was to radically transform it. With these, I'm like, I want to stick close to the album, how the album sounds, but maybe make it just a little better where we can, but I tried to work pretty quickly so that it had that same aesthetic of like, not overthinking it or over polishing it, still quick and dirty. So a lot of those are like, still, like I said, I'm trying to think, I should have looked at the track list, but I know like well, Androgynous already came out. That's the same
Oh, yeah, that's
piano
right.
take. But when Jason and Peter were going through, Jason from Rhino and Peter Jesperson, when they were going through what we had to work with, they realized that Androgynous had a handful of vocal takes that that were on the reel, and they came up with a new vocal, what they call a comp, vocal compilation. So like this take for verse one, we'll use this take, verse two. So that's how we got the kind of different vocal, but it's the same piano. I saw a comment of like, do you know how Androgynous kind of ends with the piano just sort of
Someone stops playing, right? And then just
gets a little jazzy, yeah. And someone was like, "Oh man, I thought the jazzy piano was like spontaneous," but they thought Westerberg did that again. But it's the same piano take; it's just different vocal takes over the top of that didn't get used on the original release. And then same with I should be looking at the list, but there's a couple others that are on the real record where it's the same band take. It could be the scratch vocal that Paul did, For those that don't know, like when you're recording a record, usually the singer sings something to keep it all together, then they overdub a nicer vocal. But in the case of the Replacements, Paul doesn't really sing the same thing twice, and sometimes the first thing is the best. So with some of those, we found a way to make they called like an alternate vocal version. And then Street Girl came out. That was a fun outtake to mix, and I love the beginning of that because if you listen close, like you can hear Tommy saying like maybe we shouldn't record it and just practice it, and then right after that, Paul's like, "You're recording, ain't you?" So it just kind of captures the chaos and like the dynamic between those two. Like Tommy suggests not recording it, so Paul says, let's definitely record it. And it's so funny how they do two takes of it. They get so close to having like a cool finished song and then just never to be visited again. It's just that's where, so it kind of shows you how much they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants. At the start of Who's Gonna Take Us Alive, which isn't out yet, there's also some fun studio chatter that just kind of shows a little, I wouldn't call it chaos, but just you get a little being like a fly on the wall of like, what's going into, they're kind of learning and figuring out the songs on the spot as well for some of those outtakes. So it was fun to go through and mix those because I got to, it wasn't ultimately my decision, but on some of that, when I was remixing the outtakes, if there was cool studio chatter, I would just leave it on there and see if anyone said to take it off. And usually everyone wanted to just keep it on there. And, as a fan of the Replacements, I think we all know how like some of that stuff is like a little treasure, like just to hear,
oh yeah,
just to hear them talking. Cause they, and on some of the like 2008 remasters, some of those talking bits got taken off. Like, again, I should have had a list in front of me, but I think at the start of Left of the Dial on the reissue, there's a count off missing, and on Answering Machine, the 2008 CD master, I think they chopped off the vocal intro. So I guess I just understand how important it is to keep any of those, moments intact.
Is that much of? Is there a balance to that? Because I guess I should say a balance that all of you are thinking when we're putting it together, because that's something that I like about these reissues is you get everything. You get like you guys do clean them up, but like you're saying, we get the banter, we get all these different takes and stuff. Is there a kind of balance, would you say, that is being thought of where it's like, let's give them to it raw to a degree? You know what I mean? Like, let's clean it up, but not overly clean it up. And I'm talking about kind of the reissues as a whole. I mean, I'm not even talking about just you remastering it. Like, is that something you think that's actively thought of, or, not really?
I think so, but I think it's fairly organic. I mean, if you think back to the Tim Let It Bleed, I think it's Waitress in the Sky, there's some additional talking at the top that wasn't on the album, and it's just kind of a fun little glimpse into how they're getting things together and stuff like that. And I don't know, I mean, it's one of those things where, especially for the bonus tracks, I mean, why not keep it in? It's not like it's going to be a radio single or anything like that DJs are going to be annoyed by. You're a DJ, so maybe you'll be annoyed
I'll
by
play
it
that
if you
band.
play
No,
it. Crank it up.
I definitely will not. I'll play every Paul Westerberg banter I can
Yeah.
find.
So I mean, it's not something that's overthought or manufactured, but if it's there and it's cool, keep it for sure. I mean, why get rid of it at this point? Same with, I think, on Dead Man's Pop, there was the whole Tom Waits section of bonus tracks where the replacements and Tom Waits are kind of hanging out jamming. I mean, that's
Who
basically
wouldn't
all
want to
that
hear
was.
that? Why wouldn't
Yeah.
you want to hear them talking and hanging out and playing music?
Yeah, so I'd say, we don't force it or go fishing for it, but it just if it's there. With Let It Be, my thought was if it's there, I'm going to keep it on there until someone says get rid of it. And for the most part, we kept everything, so that's fun. And not all the, there were, let me think. Temptation Eyes and one other song. We already had good mixes from Philip Broussard Jr. that him and Tommy did in, I think, the 2000s, for the 2008 versions. So, like, we kept those because those were good mixes. But like I said, there was still a lot of, not a lot, but most of the outtakes are all remixed except for the two that Philip did, and then Heartbeat, It's a Love Beat. We didn't. You can obviously tell that's from possibly a cassette at some point. We don't have the ability to. No one has a good source for that. We can't remix it. I should get the track list in front of me so I can tell you more about it. But basically it was. Peter and Jason produced the set. I was just like, I just sort of felt like I wanted to remix the stuff because again, I don't like mixing, but I just wanted to make sure that it was as replacements-esque as it can be. Because I did see some, I think Pleased to Meet Me had some bonus tracks that were remixed, and I had seen some comments that some people preferred the vintage bootlegged mix more than the fresh studio remix at the time, that we did. I didn't do it, but in the early 2020s, so I just want to make sure that, we get the best, roll up the sleeves mix of what these songs can be, because there's probably not going to be another chance to revisit these in 20 more years. There could be, but you just never know. So it just sort of happened organically where I was at Peter's house when he was literally got the files, and I kind of just half, candidly threw out a, not half-hearted, but it was like, hey, if any of these need to be remixed, just let me know. Cause Peter, for the Cowboys and the Campfire album that I mixed, Peter and his son were sort of like co-producer of that record with Tommy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're credited. So we had a good system where, like, me and my friend Ian mixed it and got all the technical stuff done. But Peter and his son Autry were like really good producer listeners. Kind of a good combination of, they had a good producer ear, but also a good music fan ear. Like, maybe the solo's too loud, or just stuff that I didn't quite have the bandwidth to take in fully, like a listener, because I'm just like happy that it's working, So I had recently had a good experience working back and forth with Peter, mixing the Cowboys and the Campfire record. So I thought, why don't we, there's only going to be like, less than 10 bonus tracks, and I knew that they'd be pretty simple because, with the outtakes, there's really no overdubs, like with a song like I Will Dare that made the record. When you got like an album take, you're adding mandolin and backing vocals and percussion, then it gets to be a lot of tracks and a lot of mixing. But, Street Girl and Who's Gonna Take Us Alive, those are really just live band takes. So there's no overdubs there's no tambourines to sort out, or, they just didn't add them because it was outtake. So I knew that mixing the outtakes would be, a relatively easy-ish job just because of there's not a lot of tracks, and probably a lot of time shouldn't be spent on it because I wanted it to fit the aesthetic of the album mix.
No, it makes total sense. I was thinking about this too when you were talking, like, remastering something, like I know we've talked about, I know you're a Replacements fan, so like I know you already know Let It Be. It's an album you've heard for years. Remastering something that you've heard and you know Let It Be, like that, versus remastering an album that maybe you're either not aware of very well, or maybe you heard like a few songs on the radio when it came out. Like, does it make it easier or harder going in having a reference point? Like, is there ignorance is bliss at all going in and remastering something if you have less reference compared to, hey, I've been listening to this album for decades?
No, I don't think so for me anyway. I mean, when I'm mastering, I'm in such an analytical mindset that I could be mastering my favorite record or my least favorite record, and I'm just not listening as for fun. I'm listening for very technical and analytical reasons. So the material is, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but that's not why I'm listening. I'm not listening to it for enjoyment. I'm listening to it to, make it sound as best that it can on all playback systems and go through it with a fine tooth comb. I've remastered a lot of Godsmack albums, and just full transparency, Godsmack was not a band I particularly grew up listening to, but I've remastered almost their whole catalog, and all those vinyl reissues are getting really good reviews on Discogs, but I wasn't like, and maybe I shouldn't have called them out specifically, but it's not the kind of music I listen to, but I could appreciate it for what it is. And actually their archives are very well, or I talked about this earlier, their archives were so well organized that it made the process very easy of remastering, because I didn't have to like sift through different versions and fix problems. It was just like I could focus on the actual job. Whereas some remastering, sometimes remastering, there's like 5 mixes of a song. It's like vocal up, vocal down, vocal, or a mix with a certain effect in the bridge, and then I have to listen to see, did they actually use that in mastering? So to kind of go back to your question, when I'm remastering, the first thing I do is try to get the original version, the purest source. So when Let It Be came up, I ordered, I think the first CD version came out in 86, 87 of Let It Be.
That was a few years after the album was released, too.
Yeah, because CDs were, in 84 is when, like, I think Springsteen put out a CD, and that was a big deal, but the indie bands weren't quite doing CDs yet, and the indie labels. So I ordered the very earliest CD copy to use as a reference point, because I think it's before or after Black Diamond, the song. There's like some tambourine jingling that got omitted on the 2008 version that some people are, not heartbroken over, but they're like, we'd really love to have, all the little details back, between song noises and stuff. So I always try to get an original source. Some remastering projects come at me so fast I don't have time to get like a CD copy, but usually Universal will they can send me the streaming master, which is basically the same. That's how, like, for the one record I noticed that there was a transition piece missing, because they sent me nice analog transfers of all the songs, but what they didn't realize was like a couple songs had transitions that weren't in the vault, so I had to steal them from the digital master. So anyways, I try to get back to the source to reference things like song spacing, any crossfades, transitions, things like that. So I'm really just, keeping the original version in mind, and then like what could be better. Like with early digital stuff, the technology was not great. So like the first version of Tim on CD is, Tim was a weird mix in general. A lot of people thought the mix was a little weird, and that was the whole point of Ed remixing it. But the CD mastering did not help that. It sort of took it even further in the wrong direction. So when I did the 2023 remaster of Tim, and I got the raw flat tape transfer, I'm like, actually, there's a lot of bass on here. It's not as thin and bright as people are used to from the first CD version, because that technology was so new and misunderstood at the time. So yeah, it kind of depends on what was done the first time and what can be corrected. Some people feel that some of the 2008 remasters were a little loud and bass heavy, like in terms of limiting. So in general, I'm trying to split the difference between the original CD master and maybe some of the remasters that got a little pushed a little too far. In 2008, so they probably did those in 2007. I mean, streaming was not on anyone's mind.
No.
CDs were still the main format, and if you just look at the average level of CDs, that just from the late 80s through the 2000s, it just kept getting louder and louder and louder. So even people, I don't know many mastering engineers or any that want to make the loudest CD ever, but they get pushed to do that because people want, it's a service industry. So, either you make the CD as loud as the band wants or you don't get the job. It's not my record. It's not my decision how loud, people hire me for my opinion and taste sometimes, and I do that. And then sometimes they love it, or sometimes they say it's good, but can we go a little further in this direction? And it's my job to work with them on that. So, I mean, it's not my decision at the end of the day. And that's the other thing with some of the audio forum people is that sometimes they criticize how loud something was mastered, the audiophile people. And it's like, it's not the mastering engineer that wanted it that loud. Either the artist wanted it that loud, or they were given mixes to master from that were already that loud, and you can't go backwards once it's crushed. You can turn it down, but you can't uncrush it really. We're starting to get some software that can uncrush stuff, but generally speaking, when it's crushed, I don't know many mastering engineers that enjoy making the loudest CD ever, but sometimes we're asked to do it, and that's it's just how it is. It's like, do you want to work or not work?
Yeah.
And there's some people that choose to not do the mega loud stuff, and maybe they don't work as much, and that's fine. I mean, it's really a service industry. It's like, there's some restaurants that, you go in there and you get what they give you, and that's their shtick. But, most restaurants are accommodating. Do you want extra cheese? You want no salt? Do you want vegetarian? You got to like give
those little nuances.
Yeah. So that's kind of what mastering is. And, so I guess, so yeah, my whole, with a lot of these reissues of the replacements, my goal was to kind of split the difference. A lot of the original replacement CDs were not loud. There was no limiting because it was throughout the 80s. And then again, the remasters might have went a little far for most people's preference. And then, with streaming changed the game, because streaming services, I'm generalizing, streaming services for the most part normalize the audio to a certain level. So super loud masters are going to get turned down anywhere from a couple decibels to 8. If you master something insanely loud, Spotify, I shouldn't even say that word, it's a naughty word. The streaming services will turn it down, sometimes up to 6, 7, 10 decibels. So what you're doing is you're squashing your mix, making it harsh and distorted, which sounds cool when you're spot checking it for 10 seconds at a time, but you don't realize that listening to a whole album like that is not always fun. It's like reading something in all caps. So, and then on top of that, so you're in all caps, but then streaming service is going to turn it down. So now you got this really small, it's distorted, it's harsh, and now it's turned way down. And so streaming has allowed us to make more dynamic masters again for the most in general. And it's not a big a deal because then it doesn't get turned down as much, but it has more breathing room and room for the drums to punch, the transient of the drum to exist and punch a little bit. So yeah, it's there's a lot of nuance to it, I guess. It depends on, I don't make a special master for CD and stream. I do in terms of resolution and formatting, but I don't make like a loud CD master and then a less loud streaming master. The vinyl master is usually a little less limited than the digital because the format translates to that better. But yeah,
that stuff's so interesting. Like, I love talking about this because people, I don't, we're going to enjoy this reissue when it comes out, but I don't think people know maybe beyond maybe like what remixing is. They don't know all these like little things. So I think it's so interesting getting into all of this with you. But on top of that, I mean, within that world, but out of mastering, I also want to talk about earlier this year, you did get to play bass again with Bash and Pop. Because we did talk about that last time. You joined the band, and I know it was the first time in a very long time, which I'm sure people listening to this, if you're excited for the Let It Be reissue, I'm pretty sure you like Bash and Pop. So I want to talk about that again. Like, how long had it been since Bash and Pop played together? Since that cruise earlier this year?
I think I stopped playing with Bash and Pop in the summer of 2017, and I think they did one more long tour with the Psychedelic Furs after that with someone else on bass, and then I think it kind of fizzled out into Cowboys in the Campfire, which is like a more, it's just Tommy and Chip in a probably a little more economical way to tour. And then COVID, of course. But yeah, I was sitting around one night and I got a text from Tommy, and I noticed that Steve Selvage and Joe, from Bash and Pop were on the text, and it just said, "Hey, got an offer to do this little Stevens Underground Garage Cruise," and it's the first one, so I'm actually familiar with these music cruises because my uncle loves going on them, but this is the first little Stevens Underground Garage Cruise, so there's no context to go off of, but I think we were a late edition, so the website was up, you could see who was playing, Social Distortion was playing, but basically Tommy sent a text to see if we'd be interested, and again, it was like this time of year, so it's starting to get cold and dark, and I'm like, I never would go on a cruise on purpose, but it's about to be winter in the Midwest, like maybe I should get out a little bit, and I didn't want to be the one guy that made it more difficult to happen. So I said I would do it because I kind of knew it wouldn't turn into touring, extensive touring. I thought, so I was basically gone for a week. And we did a couple days of rehearsals and then got on the cruise for 3 or 4 nights and did a couple sets. And it was a lot of fun to see the guys again and see Tommy again. And that was my first time playing with Tommy since he got sober. So it was I had seen videos of him and actually saw him play acoustic, sober, and I just could tell he was so much more focused and not that he was never fun to be around, but it went from just very just he's very nice, just everything was great to be around, with anyone that may drink a lot of alcohol, you just never know when something's gonna trigger someone to be upset, or the mood, a mood could change, a vibe could change, and I never had any bad, so it was nice to just be in that environment, and play with Tommy and see the guys again, and I could still play the bass. I went I think I went 4 or 5 years without touching a bass.
Jeez, man.
And so yeah, I had to do some practicing, make sure my fingers could still move, stuff like that. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. And we didn't do any new songs, but we did, I think we did 2 full band sets, and then Tommy did an acoustic set. And again, I would never go on a cruise. I don't think I would do a cruise on purpose. I'm not a cruise guy, but if you're going to go on one, that was actually a pretty good one to be on. There's a lot of cool bands. Some of the DJs from the Underground Garage channel were on the ship. And,
oh, nice.
Everything. Yeah, it was very good accommodations. We all had our own rooms on the ship, and very well taken care of, and everything was really smooth.
I think they're very interesting. I've never been on a cruise at all, let alone a music cruise. For you as the performer, is there anything different about playing on a cruise, or can you not really tell when you're playing on stage? Is there any part where you're you're playing on a cruise ship, or no? Is that just you can't even tell if you're playing that or just a stage anywhere?
No, it's a pretty big boat, so you couldn't tell. The boat had many stages. It had a theater, like a little.
Oh, wow.
Not even little, like a mid-sized theater, which is one of the rooms we played. Obviously on the top of the boat, there's a pool deck and a stage. So obviously we didn't play that stage. Then you're pretty aware that you're on a cruise ship because you can see the water and you're outside. But no, no difference. We got on the boat on a Friday morning and we played Friday night, and we played on the top level of the ship. So it was kind of stuffy. It felt like it kind of felt like a bowling alley side room. There was low ceilings, really stuffy, really carpeted, so kind of dead sound. And but yeah, I was kind of out of sorts just from being, just out of my element. But no, nothing real different. I mean, we just brought our guitars. Joe brought maybe a snare drum and cymbals. It was kind of like any other like festival thing where you just bring your essentials and use the amps they have there. And I mean, the thing is, like, the company that does it, Six Man, they do these cruises year round. So like they have it dialed in. You know, the staff is used to this kind of stuff. I mean, they have the Outlaw Country cruise, which has some crossover to Little Steven's cruise, so, everything was pretty well orchestrated as far as that goes.
I think we talked a little bit last time you were on, but talking about, being in a band and stuff like that. If I remember, you don't really have that huge burning desire. I was going to say, do you ever get that, like, man, I wish I was in a band again or had something kind of regularly? Or are you still just kind of like, you get your fix mastering and doing the behind the scenes stuff?
Yeah, I got that out of my system when I was younger. And again, I mean, I started playing in bands in like sixth grade, just kind of out of,
Jeez,
not boredom, but this is before the internet. I tried sports and I liked sports, but I just wasn't very good at them. And, like, by the time you get to middle school and high school, like, those sports are serious and you practice every day after school. And I'm like, I'm not that into it. So I kind of transitioned into music, Nirvana and Green Day had hit, and I'm like, I think I'm more into the music thing. So just kind of out of boredom and whatever, it was our fun. We weren't trying to do anything serious. It was just friends having fun after school and on the weekends and during the summer, had a band. And then I kind of like figured out recording just out of necessity. Because again, you couldn't just go to Best Buy and get a studio like you can now. I could go to Best Buy tonight and get a laptop and a microphone and make a record.
That's wild.
You couldn't quite do that back then. So I sort of, out of necessity, learned recording, and then other people started asking me to record them, and it kind of just snowballed from there. Very slow snowball, but it snowballed from there. But, I never loved touring, very much at all. So I don't have the desire to go out on tour. Some people love touring, and I never did. Luckily, some of the last things I've been involved in, travel more comfortably, hotels every night. You're not hoping someone will let you sleep on their floor. I've done all that, and it's humbling, and, it's paying your dues and all that stuff. But I like to be home. I just like to be, I don't like to be, especially as I get older, I don't know. And then, from a business standpoint, especially with how fast paced the mastering is, I can't really be gone for more than a week before stuff just stacks up too much. And, if you're constantly gone and behind and slow, then people start looking at other places for mastering because they got a release schedule. So for me, I mean, if I could retire from mastering and just play music, it would be fun. I'm not saying I wouldn't enjoy it, but I definitely have no desire to do any extensive touring, maybe a show here or there. If, like the cruise thing, like, that was totally random.
That was awesome.
And I was a little bit, surprised / honored that Tommy reached out to me because, someone else played bass in Bash and Pop after me for a brief period of time, and he could have asked them, but I guess he wanted to get and I call it Bash and Pop 2.0, because obviously there was the 90s Bash and Pop, and then I guess I was more part of Bash and Pop 2.0. And then, so yeah, when he texted me and Steve and Joe, I'm like, yeah, it'd be good to see everybody. And, even like I said, I'm not really into cruises, but this opportunity.
That was a cool cruise. I've never been on a cruise, but that would have been one. I wanted to go on that. That lineup was insane. Yeah, I've never seen a lineup like that for a cruise.
People had a lot of fun, and everyone was cool. I didn't see any like fighting or people being stupid. It was just very, everyone was very, pleasant, to be on. And I'm like, I just thought, this opportunity fell into my lap. It may not ever happen again. And, I found over the years that once in a while, if you get out of your comfort zone it can lead to something. Either you just have a nice experience, or it leads to something that would have never happened if you didn't get out of your comfort zone. And you meet, I actually got to meet Ed Stasium of all things.
Oh, nice.
Ed was, we had talked when we were doing the Tim project, and we talked on the phone and emailed a lot. But Ed was on the cruise. He did a couple, he knew a lot of the bands, but he did like a Q&A thing, and he actually sat in with one of the bands. Drawing a blank. He sat in with one of the bands on guitar, and but on the last night we were in the artist lounge area, and Joe from Bash and Pop actually, he's like, "Is that Ed Stasium?" Ed was just eating by himself at the table, all by himself, and we're like, "Sorry, Ed, can we sit here and talk to you?" And so we got to ask Ed some questions, and I got to finally meet him after so much emailing and stuff about the Tim project. So it's cool to finally meet Ed in person, and a bunch of other people. So
No, that is so fun. I mean, again, if you're going to do some one-offs, why not some fun things like that? Getting to go play a cruise with all those bands and with Bash and Pop. That's pretty sick.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be easy to sort of make fun of the whole thing or whatever, or blow it off, but it was a cool opportunity, and I'm thankful for it. And it's great to see Tommy and Steve and Joe again too, and hang out with them, and play some music. I mean, it felt like no time had passed, really. I don't know if it sounded that way, but it felt that way. It felt pretty good. Originally they were trying to maybe set up a few warm-up shows in Miami before we got on the ship, but it just never came together. So we just did a couple of rehearsals and went on the cruise, and just in and out.
Well, as we start closing this out, talk about earlier in the year, but we got like 2 months left of 2025. I mean, is Let It Be kind of the last big project for you for the year? Or you still, these last 2 months, you're still going to be working away on stuff?
Oh yeah, I'll be working away. I mean, I think, I wrapped up my duties on Let It Be like right before the cruise in May. It was a lot of stop and go with Let It Be. We did the remixes and then got it all mastered, and then there was a couple legal or business things that delayed the project, and I think for a point in time it looked like it might not happen, which was kind of a bummer, because we put all this time into putting it together. But they got that sorted out, and then like right before the cruise, I wasn't scrambling, but suddenly these two things were clashing. It's like, I got to finish Let It Be. There wasn't much to do, but there's once it was officially a go, we had to like just make sure everything was in order, and then get on the cruise. So that's been done for a while. And then, throughout the summer, test pressings. I actually didn't approve the first test pressing. Me and Peter both heard of something that we thought could be better. So there was a test pressing. There was a delay because of the test pressing, and then a delay for something that wasn't audio related is the reason the release date got bumped back. But so that's been done for a while. But yeah, I mean, I'm still going to be, and I was just gone for a week in Portugal on a little vacation, which was great. So I'm catching up from that. And like I said earlier, I mean, whether it's reissues or just in general, people tend to like have a real or, what's the right word? A real or, I guess, artificial or self-imposed deadline of getting it done before the end of the year. So I'm expecting a little bit of a wave of projects. And if that doesn't happen, I'll actually be happy to sort of take it easy too, because it's been a record year for me, which I'm really thankful for in terms of mastering projects and stuff like that. So I wouldn't complain if it got a little slower for the rest of the year. You just got to be careful of, it's tough working for yourself, like, juggling projects, what's too much and what's not enough, because you got, especially me being, I'm almost 45. As I get older, people I know, I'm going to know less people that need records mastered, is what, because I'm not getting any younger. So I need to like I try to get out to shows and see younger bands, but there's other, so I need to like, make sure I stay busy enough.
Up with the scene and all that.
Yeah, I got to stay, it's all word of mouth. So, I mean, just got to stay busy enough. So But yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that I can't talk about. There's, it's not Paul or Tommy, but I just did some remastering slash bonus material mastering for definitely a replacements related thing that should be announced before the end of the year. Again, it's not any new Paul stuff or any new Tommy. But it's someone that was in the replacements, some solo stuff, getting kind of repackaged with bonus tracks and stuff like that. So that should be coming out maybe by the time this airs, or by the time people get around to checking it out, if they made it this far into the podcast, which is unlikely. But yeah, there's a little bonus for anyone that's still listening. There's some cool stuff coming. I just finished it up, and yeah, who knows?
I am very excited for that. I'm very excited to see what it is. I mean, how far into 2026 do you kind of know your schedule? I assume at least the first few months you have, for the most part, fleshed out. I'm sure you get those random projects, but I'm sure you at least already kind of know your first few months.
Not really. I mean, mastering is so fast paced. I mean, I'll literally get a single and someone's like, "Can you have this ready like tomorrow?"
Jeez, so yeah, you did say that's crazy turnaround.
It's not always, but it does happen. So I mean, if you're a producer or mixer, you want to be booked out 2 to 3 months probably. With mastering, it's more like 2 to 3 weeks. Like,
wow.
If no more projects came in starting right now, I could probably work for another month. I could probably work for about 2 to 3 weeks. And then after that, I would have no more projects. But I'm not. That's normal for mastering. I'm not worried in the least because of how quickly stuff comes in. Versus, producing, it's bigger. You got to be thinking more long term. But with mastering, it's always like, if I get a record in, I try to have it back to the person in like a week, maybe 2 weeks tops if it's a longer one. Or, everyone has different. On my intake form, people can put their deadline, and some people put like the soonest, and I can actually control what the soonest date is, but it's usually about a week or somewhere between a week or two. And some people choose the soonest date, but some people put like a month or two. So I sort of like, I just have a to-do list. I always have like just a running list of like the projects that are in my queue and what's more priority. And it's not like the biggest project. It's like who has the soonest deadline. And I try to knock out singles because it makes my list look smaller. If I get like 4 singles in over the course of a day or two, which happens, I'll just knock them out because then my list, like, it's a fast way to make the list look smaller.
That makes sense.
Just a psychological thing for me. But yeah, so I have no idea what I'm going to be doing. I mean, last year, like a week before Christmas, I got a call from Luther Dickinson of North Mississippi All-Stars, and he's like, "Hey, I guess our record has to be done by Christmas." Because their record label had a deadline. So, I mean, I was working like Christmas Eve, and Luther's a little bit of an intense guy, and we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants in terms of edits. Like, he was still finishing the mixes. It was sort of, I'm not saying it was a rush job, but it was like, it wasn't like I'm done with the mixes, now master. It's like he was kind of done mixing it, and then I did some mastering, and then he tweaked the mixes, and then it was a long record, so for vinyl we had to like shorten some sound. It was kind of a mad scramble, and that, I was working on Christmas Eve, and that record was not even on my radar like a week prior to that. So that's how fast mastering can come at you. So again, no idea what next year is going to bring. I'm just hoping to get through the next 2 months. With the holidays, there's a little more downtime. I got family stuff, so I mean, I work a lot, but with the holiday, someone has a holiday party or you go to an event, and that's just less time working. So trying to make sure I can still get all my work done with a little more downtime, and then see what the next year brings. I mean, the bigger labels, they kind of shut down, but by like December 15th, or even early December, they're just not really in the office. So sometimes that stuff quiets down, and then it ramps up right after the new year. So anyways, that's a long way of saying it's just, if I'm booked out for 2 or 3 weeks, that's more than enough because it's going to fill in. it's going to fill in no problem. And thankfully, I have a handful of producers and mixers that send me stuff all the time, so I don't have to. It's not when you have that situation, it's great because then it's hard to not that I go after bands, but if you can have a couple producers feeding you mastering projects, that's like way easier than dealing with 20 bands. If you can deal with 2 or 3 producers that have 4 or 5 bands or artists, and it's just a lot easier that way. So thankfully I'm busy. I'm very thankful to be in the position that I'm in, but and I don't know what the next replacements one's going to be. There's really, I think, only Stink or All Shook Down left.
There's not many. Yeah, there's really not many at this point. Oh, Hootenanny?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how much stuff there is for Hootenanny, and they also did. I didn't do it because it was a analog. They had the analog tape cut to lacquer without any digital processing for the Vinyl Me Please. I'm sure you know about Vinyl Me Please.
Oh yeah.
So they did Hootenanny a year or two ago. So I don't know if that count. Like I don't know if they let
that
them.
Counts as the release.
I don't know if Rhino sort of let them have Hootenanny because there's not enough. I'm just speculating, so don't take this. But maybe Rhino let them have Hootenanny for Vinyl Me Please because there's not enough to do a deluxe
Kind of bonus stuff.
Yeah, but there could be. I mean, Peter Jesperson has the ultimate archive of all this stuff. He's got everything. He's very meticulous and detailed, and saved so much stuff. So all the Replacements fans have him to thank for it in terms of obviously just giving them a chance at putting out the records, but saving all this bonus material. Even end of the at the end of the night, you make a rough mix at the studio on a cassette tape to take it home, and he saved a lot of that stuff. So that's how you get some of these bonus tracks that never got finished, but he still has the end of the night rough mix that allows us to listen to the song that never got finished and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I think Stink, All Shook Down will probably be a bigger job because by that point, Paul has a home studio, so he can do a lot of
those
home
demos on the '08 one. I remember all the home demos on the reissue, the 2008 reissue. I think a lot of them were the home demos, if I remember correctly.
So that could be pretty expansive. I don't know if they would combine Stink and Hootenanny to make a box. I really have no idea what's next. We're still, the one we just did is not even out yet, so no one. There's really no talk about what's next. I'm sure. It seems like, it seems like more of them will happen, but as far as what's next, there's just limited choices for sure. So I think it's going to be more carefully planned, and no one's really in a hurry to do it. There's no.
Like you said, this one's not even out yet. We're still talking a few weeks before Let It Be comes out.
Well, I mean, for a while there, they're on like a yearly cycle, so people got used to that, and then for various reasons we took a little break, and so now on the home stretch, I guess, see what happens. But I don't even know what it's going to be. I would imagine maybe after the new year, I'll hear what
I'm sure whatever it is, I'll be excited, as most Replacements fans.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us will complain about new material from that, or new old material. I will never be mad if you say, hey, we unearthed something else, here's a new one. I'm okay with that.
It usually starts with the live show. It's usually like, hey, is this live show going to be usable? I mean, part of the problem is, Live at Maxwell set the bar really high.
That was a good one.
And there's just not a lot of live shows to choose from. And I think it's a combination of, they don't always want to do the obvious one that's been bootlegged. There's been some pretty decent live bootlegs, Replacements. But if a lot of the fans already have that, maybe they want to do something different, and sometimes they might not have a good source. I mean, just because something's on YouTube doesn't mean that anyone has like a good source for it anymore. Like, you don't want to pull. We can't really pull it from YouTube with any kind of decent quality or any. So there's a lot of factors that come into like which live show gets used, and with Let It Be, apparently Tommy really wanted to use this particular live show, and I
Oh,
think it's pretty
nice.
good. I mean, it starts with "Can't Hardly Wait," and when Paul introduces it as a new song, he's like, "A new song in the key of D," and then they just start playing "Can't Hardly Wait." First song. You can tell it's pretty new. It's a pretty typical live show. A lot of covers. They're pretty focused and tight though. My favorite part is that I don't know how well people are going to hear it, but because I went through it with headphones, and there's one point where someone yells at them to buy a guitar tuner, which I think is hilarious. The crowd's heckling them, and someone's like, "Buy a guitar tuner." So there's a lot of good and you can hear some people talking about like casual, just music nerds talking like, "Hey, did you buy the new record?" And it's just a cool little time capsule. It's not live. It's not live at Maxwell's quality though. It's an audience recording, but
I'm excited to hear it. I'm sure most people are
Yeah.
still excited to hear that.
I
But
think it's cool.
But I mean, and again, congrats on a huge year. I mean, let it be. But beyond that, too, I mean, you just had a big year with a Mystery Room. Where can we find you online? Where should we send people to follow you and see what you're mastering next? And also, I'm sure people can find the Let It Be box set, but also where can we find that and all that good stuff now?
Yeah, well, mysteryroommastering.com is my main kind of website or hub. And on the homepage, it links to like my Instagram and Blue Sky and Threads, where you can see some recent. I usually try to post some highlights of the recent releases, and maybe some commentary on Blue Sky that isn't always music based. But yeah, so the website is great. It has a submission form if you want me to do any mastering. You can see the price of what it might cost and actually submit the project right on the website, which has been very helpful for me. It's kind of like my assistant, instead of having to ask the band or artist like 20 questions, it's like, here's all the things I need to know to get started on your record as soon as possible. And you can just submit it without even a lot of back and forth if you don't want to do that. So yeah, I'd say the website is a great place to get started, mysteryroommastering.com. And, feel free to email me if you have any mastering questions or questions about any of the replacement stuff. Sometimes I'm willing to, there's some things I don't want to reveal just because it can, if you say one thing, people can sort of misconstrue it or take it in a wrong direction. So I've learned to not, it's not that I'm hiding anything. I just careful about what I let out because I don't want it to get reshaped,
Understandable.
Yeah, one person sort of skews it one way, and then all of a sudden it's this whole other thing. But I'm happy to answer questions and talk about that. And yeah, that's basically it.
Well, I mean, Justin, fun talking to you again. Did we miss anything? Anything else to let the good people know before we close this one out?
No, I think you got plenty to work with here in terms of you probably got to edit some stuff out, but it was fun to catch up with you on this and do this again because I really enjoyed the last discussion we had, and this one was fun too.
These are we'll do it again, and we'll do it replacements or beyond. You're always doing something. It's just fun talking mastering with you. So we'll definitely have you back.
Can't make any guarantees, but maybe we'll have a all shook down discussion at some point. But again, that's I haven't heard what's next, so don't quote me. Don't go on the internet and say that's the next one.
Yeah, I won't run to the forums right now and go, you got to hear what this guy told me.
I'm being 100%. I'm being 100% honest. I literally have no idea what they're gonna pull up next. It's not even on my radar. So it could.
I think
be
people should
nothing.
know that though, so people don't keep asking you. I'm sure even Let It Be you were asked about for years. Like Let It Be being just one of their biggest albums. I'm sure you were asked forever. When's the Let It Be reissue coming?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's sort of like the beginning of their 3 album. Let It Be, Tim, and Pleased to Meet Me is a pretty incredible.
That's a run.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid run. So now we're there, and now we just got to do the back half and see where it goes. But anyways, I'll let you get back to your evening, and it's good to chat with you, and we'll do it again.
All right, we'll do this again, man. All right, well, I'm Anthony Merchant talking to Justin Perkins right here on the Power Chord Hour.